If you're only clicking post on transactions in the QuickBooks Online Bank Feed, you're probably making your bookkeeping a lot more difficult than it needs to be. The QuickBooks Online Bank Feed can actually handle a wide variety of different types of transactions. It can add new transactions that come through the bank feed. It can match those transactions to existing things already on the books. It can split transactions out so that you're seeing a single transaction go to multiple expense or income categories. It can also create post-dated or backdated, transactions for both accounts payable and accounts receivable. And you can even pair transactions that exist in more than one bank feed. Finally, there is a whole host of things that you can do, like attaching documentation to individual transactions and toggling voluntarily between match and categorize in case something that is offered up as a match shouldn't be matched, or conversely, something is coming up as categorized that actually should be matched. Finally, there's a really cool AI feature that's come out relatively recently where you can actually view the categorization history of previous transactions to help guide how you categorize current transactions if there isn't a rule or another transaction already on the books to guide that process. So with that in mind, we're actually going to dive into our bank feed or bank transactions tab today and really look at how all of these different transaction types play out and interact with each other. Let's go ahead and get started. So to get to our bank transactions tab, we're going to want to click on accounting, and then bank transactions is the first option to pop up. Now, I actually do have this bookmarked, so if I mouse over my bookmarks selection on the left-hand navigation menu there, we can see bank transactions does come up. And I do find that I navigate to this very regularly, not just in this sample set of books, but in my own books and in my clients' books as well. So I have actually built out my bookmarks bar on each of those books so that I can quickly and easily navigate. And I will actually be doing a video about that in the future. But let's go ahead and really dive into this bank transactions tab, okay? Now we can see we have multiple accounts across the top here, all right? So I have my primary business checking account, my business savings account, and then I happen to have a sample, and this is all fake data, by the way. This is all just sample data that I create for the sake of running through tutorials. But I also do have a Business American Express credit card here. Okay, so I can navigate to each of these accounts by selecting their account card from this upper navigation pane. Okay, additionally, I could always reorder these if I wanted to by selecting this drop-down menu right here and then saying reorder accounts. Now, I have actually already organized these the way that I like to have them set up, and I honestly recommend that you take a look at yours as well. As a general rule, I like to start with the primary operating checking account and then go through and classify each transaction from each account. So I have checking account first, then savings account, then credit card. And here's why, okay? When I am walking through and adding transactions, I want to be sure that I am matching up or pairing up transactions that exist in more than one account, okay? So I would expect to see transfers happening between my business checking account and my savings account and my business checking account and my credit card. So if I go all the way through and classify all of the transactions from the business checking account and then move on to the other accounts, I know that the transactions over there will have matches or pairs available to them, okay? This means that I don't run the risk of creating duplicate parallel transactions that will ultimately mess up my books and cause my balance sheet and my reconciliations to be messy, okay? From there, we have a few other things. Any transactions that still need to be classified will be in this pending section right here. Okay, so I can see I have 30 transactions, all of them for the month of May, here in my pending tab. All right, if I go over to posted, I'm going to see all of the other transactions that have already been posted onto my books. Now, you can see here, one of those actually includes a transaction that is automatically added from my bank transactions tab to my register as soon as it hits the bank feed. Okay, that is another important thing to understand. A transaction that is in our bank transactions tab has not yet hit our books. Okay, this is all just a holding area where transactions go until they are confirmed and added to our books. There are some exceptions to that, including if we're using accounts payable and accounts receivable, but we're going to be getting into that in just a moment here. So the last item here is excluded transactions. Okay, now this is a sample file, so I have actually gone through and excluded transactions that haven't ended up working out. But as a general rule, you're probably not going to see or use excluded a whole lot on your own books. There are some exceptions to this. Occasionally, I have seen a bank feed get broken where a transaction that only happened once was actually brought through multiple times. I did in that instance end up having to exclude that transaction so that it wasn't showing up on my books more than once. That was just a glitch though. The only other time I've really seen this be an issue is if the bank feed is broken for whatever reason. Sometimes when it is restored, you'll have either duplicate data or missing data. Okay, some banks do allow you to select the date that you want the account to be connected again, in which case you can kind of make sure manually that that doesn't happen, but that is not always the case. So sometimes we have to go and look at what is already on our books and make sure that we're not adding transactions that are already there. Okay, in that case, we might have to go through and exclude some transactions that are already on the books. But those transactions are all stored. So if for whatever reason we accidentally excluded something and we didn't mean to, we could always bring it back into pending simply by clicking undo right here. And then it would go back into the pending section and we could classify it if we needed to. Okay. Now, with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start looking at what's actually going on down here in this grid. Okay. So first of all, if I click anywhere in a line here, I will expand this particular transaction and I will get a little bit more detail about what's going on here. So for example, I might see more of the bank description than fits in this little tiny box here. All right. I'm also going to get some new AI features coming in to try to help with classification. Now, as with all automation and all AI features, you're going to get sick of hearing me say this, but trust but verify, okay? The AI features that QuickBooks has been rolling out have actually been doing a pretty darn good job. That being said, they are not universally on the ball, and we don't want to just assume that they're going to be classifying things correctly for the purposes of our books. At the end of the day, it is our responsibility to ensure that what is being reported is complete and accurate, and we don't want to assume that an automation is going to be able to take it off our hands and do it the way that we would, okay? So we can see here, this is actually a new vendor for the business. So there is no categorization history for us to refer to. But if there were, we would actually be able to click on categorization history and see how these transactions for this particular vendor had been classified in the past. This is a really nice quality of life improvement because if you wanted to see how a transaction had been qualified or categorized, previously, you actually had to go into the vendor's profile to see how it had been done. Okay. Now that information, if it is available, shows up right here in line. Okay. Another thing here that's really nice, and it's not available for all banks or all bank connection types, but it is available for some. Sometimes an attachment will come over from the bank and that will show up right here. It would actually say 1 or 2 or however many attachments were there. When that happens, you can actually click on those particular attachments and get a little bit more information from the bank about what that transaction is about. Okay. The biggest example where I see this happening is usually with checks. If a client is out there handwriting checks or, printing or not printing checks through the accounts payable system in QuickBooks, these attachments will sometimes flow through onto the bank feed and help you classify and match those up, which is amazing. That's really fantastic that that's there. So now that we've gone through that, let's look at a few other things before we start talking about when we're using the various types of transactions that we can enact here in the bank feed. So first, we see on this very far, well, not the very, very far, but almost to the far right-hand side, we have options to either match or categorize transactions. Now, by default, a lot of these are set to categorize, and it looks like by and large, that's probably pretty accurate. But if you ever see something where you know there is a match on the books, you can always just toggle to match to view transactions that might be a match. Okay, that is really lovely and really phenomenal for just ease of entry. Same thing here. If I knew for a fact that this was not the match for this transaction, I could click categorize and just categorize that transaction instead. Another thing over here, and this is a new feature in QuickBooks. I actually already have a video out on this, so I will link that. But you can, if you click on this little right-hand arrow right here, have a few additional options for how to handle transactions. The newest one right here is to create a backdated bill, or if it is incoming money, you can create a backdated invoice, okay? Like I said, that is a brand new feature, new to QuickBooks, only came out within the last month or so, and they are making changes to it on a regular basis. So just, take whatever video is out already with a grain of salt. Understand that the user interface might look a little bit different than it did when the video was recorded, but the bones of the situation are still the same as of now, okay? We can also go in here, and if a rule is being applied to a transaction, you saw we could edit that rule if we wanted to. If there is no rule being applied to the transaction, we have the option to create a rule. Okay, the final option here, and I actually really enjoy this one, especially when it comes to things like loans or bills that might have multiple expense categories associated with them that haven't yet been sorted out on the accounts payable side, is you can split transactions. So let's say, for example, that I wanted to split out this insurance payment, because this insurance payment is not just for liability insurance, it is also for car insurance. Okay, if I click on the transaction and then scroll down a bit, I have the option to split this transaction. When I do that, it's going to pop up with this separate screen. Okay, now for the purposes of this particular sample file, having car insurance is a new thing here. I actually just purchased a car and went through that process. So having a car insurance expense is brand new. So what I would want to do is I would want to go ahead and add that car insurance expense category and make sure that that was being classified the way that I wanted to see it. So here I have insurance, and I could put in for the description general liability. And then I would want to put in the amount. So let's say that it is, $560.72. Okay. Well, that seems a little high, actually. Let's say $460.72, because I think it needs to be split a little bit better between the general liability and the auto insurance, okay? So what we see here is when I enter that amount in, it is showing me that I have not classified everything that is part of this transaction just yet. I still need to classify $151.78 in order for this transaction to be completed. So I'm going to go ahead and I can add a new account here, which is really nice. I'm going to say car insurance, because I want my car insurance and general liability insurance to show up as separate line items on my profit and loss. And I can go ahead and say it's an expense account. It is a vehicle expense. Where's that? Oh, there we go. Auto, way at the top. And the last thing here, I am going to say Well, we'll go ahead and leave it out of line right now. We might decide that we want to create a car and truck general expense account and put vehicle expenses underneath it later, but since that hasn't been done yet, we're just going to go ahead and leave this as is. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save right here. And we see we have car insurance as an expense, and I'll put that there. And then what we would want to make sure is to fill in the rest of the amount. Now, if you've received a bill from a vendor, you would be referencing that bill to enter the individual line items on this transaction, okay? For the purposes of this particular transaction, I'm kind of making this one up, but the overall mechanics are the same, okay? So I'm going to put in 151.78. Critically, we want to see that there is now a difference of 0. And I do want to show you just one thing here. I actually cannot hit split and post without having accounted for all of this transaction, okay? So I have to have the full amount of the transaction recorded before I can hit split and post. Once that's done, if I hit split and post right now, this will be taken from my bank transactions tab and put onto my bank register, and it will show up on all of my reports. Okay, so I will go ahead and say split and post. Another thing here is we can create rules for transactions. Now, I have several other videos about creating rules. We're not going to go into super in-depth creation of rules for this particular video. But in order to do that, we would either select the caret on the far right-hand side and say create a rule, or if we have the transaction expanded already, we can say create a rule right down here at the bottom, okay? Now, this is actually a good example because this particular vendor is already on my list and I have already had transactions flowing through my business. So I can look at what it's saying the expense category has been in the past, and then I could make my decision about whether or not it needs to stay in that category or whether I should categorize it differently. So we'll go ahead and leave that one alone and talk about the last few types of transactions that we might be running into here, okay? So first and foremost, here we have items that have rules associated with them. What that means is that in the past, I have gone through and I've created a rule to make categorizing this transaction a little bit easier in the future, okay? You can have QuickBooks auto add transactions that have rules associated with them. And for some transactions, I will end up doing that. But as a general rule, I like to watch how a rule plays out for a few months before I opt to have it automatically added to my books. Because the thing is, if a transaction is automatically added, I'm not going to see it show up here in my bank transactions tab. As soon as it shows up there, QuickBooks is automatically going to go, oh, I have a rule that is associated with this, and I'm going to add it to your books automatically. Now, if something is always the same, that's great. But if you have anything where you might want to do a second verification or just want to have eyes on it again, it's just as easy to have the rule applied, but still let it show up in the bank transactions tab so that you can approve that and approve that the rule was used as intended. All right, now let's go ahead and look at a couple of different options that we have here. Now we can see this transaction is offering up a match. That's fantastic, but we want to go ahead and look at a couple of things here. First, this is a bill that is showing up. Okay, so what this tells me is that there is an outstanding bill on my books for $450 from Nope Social Media. Now, since the bank description says social media and the amount is $450, I would say that is a relatively high confidence match. But here are a couple of things to keep in mind. I have not yet recorded the bill payment in QuickBooks Online. Now, if I match this up, that is effectively recording the bill payment, so I don't necessarily have to stop here, go out, record the bill payment, and come back in to make this match. But I do want to be sure that I am matching to the correct transaction. So if it's an amount like $450, which is, kind of a round even number and might apply to multiple vendors, we just want to do our due diligence and make absolutely sure that this is the transaction we want to match up. For this particular example, I actually created this bill to match up with this transaction, so I know that this is the correct match. I can go ahead and click match right here, and this will be moved onto my books and matched up with that existing transaction that is already there. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at this one for the matching invoice that it goes with. Okay, this one I would say would be considered an even higher confidence match because, let's be honest, what are the odds that I have another transaction on my books for $1,519? And what are the odds that I received a payment from Patel Accounting for an invoice that was sent to Devin Patel? Okay, slim to none, I would say. But if you're ever in a place where you want to go in and examine the match and make sure that there are no other possible matches, all you have to do is click match on this little toggle bar right here. And it will take you to the screen where all the matches, all the possible matches show up. Okay. Now, since this is a sample file, we don't have a lot of transactions occurring here. Do know that in your own books, you might end up showing tons of possible matches for a particular transaction, okay? If that happens, don't panic. Start with a couple different things. You can actually filter these matches down by a couple of different types and ways. I could maybe say that I only want to show open invoices for this. Now, all of these happen to be open invoices, but maybe there's a different transaction type that could be contributing to this on your books. Additionally, I could always tighten down the date range. So it's automatically assigning a date range of 2/16 of 2026 through 6/16 of 2026. But it's possible that I might want to see a smaller or a larger window for this invoice. Okay, so you can absolutely customize this however you would like to see it. But again, we're looking at this. This would be a very high confidence match. We have we have the amount, $1,519, which is a very specific amount. And again, Patel Accounting, Devin Patel, that all seems to match up. So I can go ahead and click match here, and that will move this off my books. Now, here is a fantastic example of that whole trust but verify thing that I was talking about, okay? I happen to know, because I have familiarized myself with the accounts payable and accounts receivable reports for this particular training file, that I am owed $950 by Amanda Reyes, okay, of Reyes Creative. And there are actually invoices on my books that come to that total amount. But QuickBooks is not offering up any matches, okay? So what I have to do is I have to manually tell QuickBooks that matches are available and then match those transactions up. So if I click match right here, it's going to take me into this particular window again, and I can see I have two open invoices for Amanda Reyes, one for $890 and one which was originally $3,570 that now has an open balance of $60. Well, these two come up to $950. But QuickBooks is not making that connection. So I have two options at this point. I can either go in and receive the payment and then match the payment, or since I'm already here on this screen, if I just select these two invoices, it's going to associate those two transactions with this $950. And as we can see, the bank transaction amount and the selected amount are the same. So I can go ahead and match this transaction and move on. Okay, so basically what this is doing is it is completing the final step of the accounts receivable process. So I've created the invoices already, and instead of going in and manually receiving payment against them, creating the deposit, and then matching the deposit, I'm skipping those steps and going right to telling QuickBooks that this payment matches these two invoices and it should mark them as paid. Okay, so I'll go ahead and hit match here. And that transaction, likewise, will have moved off my books. All right. I'm sorry, it will have moved out of my bank transactions tab and onto my books, I should say. All right, let's look at one more transaction type here, and then we'll probably be about done with the bank feed for the time being, although let's be honest, we're never all the way done with the bank feed. We can see here, we have a couple of transactions where instead of seeing rule, we're seeing a similar icon that says pair, okay? Now, this is something relatively new in the grand scheme of things. It used to be that QuickBooks wasn't always good at recognizing when transactions had matches in other bank feeds, okay? This was one of the really primary reasons that it used to be almost essential to work through each individual account before you moved on to the next one, okay? Because what would happen is we would have a transfer to savings, but QuickBooks wouldn't necessarily match that up with a transaction that was still sitting in the bank feed. So sometimes we would see transactions not matching up at the end of the day. It has somewhat resolved that, but again, not 100%, not completely. We still want to be going through this process and verifying this at every step of the way. So I see here, it is suggesting that there is a transaction to pair to on 5/9 for $2,500, okay? Let's go ahead and check out the savings account before I match this up. So if I go over to the bank transactions tab for the savings account, I can see right here on 5/9, I do have a received transfer of $2,500. So since that is the case, I can safely go ahead and pair this transaction. Okay, now it's already saying pair, so all I have to do to make sure that those two match up at this point is select post. Okay, now here's what happens. When I go back over to my checking accounts bank feed, you'll see that that transaction is no longer there. Okay, it has already been taken out of this bank transactions tab because we told QuickBooks that those two transactions it was the other side of that same transaction, basically. So QuickBooks said, great, we're going to take care of that, move that, and it's now on my books. So if I go into my bank register for my business checking account, I am going to see a payment out on 5/9, there it is, or a transfer out to the business savings account. And on top of that, I am going to see, if I go into my business savings account here, that there is a deposit of $2,500, okay? All of that is happening exactly as I would expect it to, and that just means that the transactions were matched together and all set, okay? Now, you can see there are still other things that you can do in the bank transactions tab. One that I didn't go over, and I'm just going to walk through it really quickly because I think it's a really cool feature, is that if you have expanded this particular transaction and you want to add documentation to it, you have a couple different ways of doing that. You can either select upload right here and go find the file that you want to attach. You can attach PDFs and Excels. And I believe that they're working on expanding it into a couple other types. I think that now you can actually do JPEGs as well, which is new. It used to only be either PDFs or Excel. But what you can actually do that's even easier is if you already have the file up and on your computer somewhere, you can just drag and drop the file anywhere into this gray box here, and it will automatically attach it to the transaction. So that's pretty nice. Okay. And again, as far as shoring up your books, it really doesn't hurt to provide the documentation if you have it. Then if somebody else is looking at things down the line, whether it's your CPA, tax preparer, or, heaven forbid, the IRS auditing your books, then you have all the documentation there and set to go. All right. Thank you so much for watching today. I'm Holly from Accrual Mistress Bookkeeping and Consulting. I really hope you found this helpful. I know that the bank feed is one of the kind of higher confusion elements of QuickBooks because it does have a lot going on in it and there are a lot of different options for how you can handle transactions. So if you have any questions, please do leave those in the comments below and don't forget to like and subscribe.